Hi guys, welcome back to Creative Tap. Now we've got a real treat for you today. We're going back to our VFX Talk series and we're talking to Matt Skonicki from the USA. He runs VFX for Filmmakers, the YouTube channel, and vfxforfilmmakers.com. Links will be down below, so make sure you check them out. But I don't want to keep you waiting anymore because it is a great interview with a great guy. Let's dive on in. Yeah, cool. Awesome. So do you want to start off by introducing yourself, who you are, what you do, talk about your YouTube channel, where you've worked, stuff like that?
Sure. My name is Matt Skonicki. I have been, I started out, I was actually working like a service job, and I had a awesome a barber named Lisa. She's still a great friend of mine today, and I always tell her I just trying to get into, I started out in film at Columbia, but I went back into retail jobs and so forth, and Lisa knew the head of cinematics at what is now NetherRealm Studios. So they first, and I had only had a film degree, so I didn't really, but I had a huge passion for CG and so forth and VFX. And I put together a reel with live action footage and all this and so forth, and I sent it in. And from there, the cinematics director showed it to the team there, and they brought me in as an intern. Okay. So I got to work under John McClenahan, who had previously been the director of old shows like Tiny Toons, which is an old Warner Brothers show, more traditional animation. But he ran the cinematics division, which was this, the intros, outros between stuff in video games such as Mortal Kombat and a series of sports games. At the time, it was called Midway Games. Now it's NetherRealm Studios that got bought out by Warner Brothers. So it was really cool, and it was just the beginning of Unreal 3. We were working with such. It was a perfect. I was there for the transition time between old gen to next gen. And it was really crazy, all the bugs and all the garbage we had to work out. But I got to work there, and I worked my way up to cinematics character artist. Then finally I went on the character team, where I got to work with amazing artists like Tony Llewellyn, who really kind of embedded in me the artistic needs that needed to be there, because I was more of a techie guy. And he pounded me like a hammer, and I was a nail and he was the hammer, to get me to get to a caliber of artistic integrity, which was crazy. And he didn't hold back. He was a tough cookie. And eventually he offered me to go teach at Columbia downtown in Chicago. And I said, "What's that like?" He's like, "Oh, it's babysitting." And I go, babysitting? And he's like, "Yeah, it's babysitting." And I didn't really understand that until many years later after teaching. But I had taught at Columbia, and then eventually I left NetherRealm and went to teach at Tribeca full-time, Tribeca Flashpoint, which is now, they keep changing the name of the college. But I got to work under really great, amazing artists who also do a lot of online training, like Chris Tadine, who is an incredible artist. He does a lot of work online with the Houdini training. And from there, eventually I started to work for different studios. I got to teach a lot of kids that went off to go work at major studios, and it was great to see them. Chicago has always been bittersweet, because when you're a teacher out there, there's this mentality that, well, you're a teacher and you give us our employees, you're not supposed to come here and work. And I had a fire to get back into production, because as a teacher, you can easily become a dinosaur. And that can only last so long before the students start getting crabby with you, blah, 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 blah. Mostly it's their excuses. I always say today we have the most, I don't want to get negative, but it's just very vindictive, and there's lack of mercy in today's students, because they expect so much for the price tag. And education is being dictated by the building and the administration, not me as a teacher. So I kind of took a break from teaching. I kind of walked away from that and started my own business, because I figured if I'm I want to teach people who want to learn.
Yeah,
Not to say that there was kids at Tribeca that, there's always the 50-50. And private colleges are a little bit tricky because sometimes those colleges are all about getting people in the door, and they just just get in here. You got a pulse, come in here. And that is when you have an open enrollment like that, you spend so much time trying to help people down here that the people up here are like, you're ignoring me, I'm not getting my money's worth. It was a big headache, and I eventually kind of said, not that I didn't have a great time, and not that we didn't raise up some amazing artists. We did the best that we could for what we could do at these schools with our team. We ignored the administration. We didn't even know how much students were paying. All we knew was they were paying a lot, and we needed to do our best as instructors, the best we can do with the little resources that we had. And VFX is always usually the most underfunded department in most of these schools. Right now, private schools are taking a severe hit because of everything. Everybody's taking a severe hit, COVID and all this. And I'm already starting to see it. But eventually I said, I'm going to make my own business. I was talking to my dad, and he's like a self-made man. He's helped build fusion reactors in France. He's worked at he just retired from Stanford University. Now he's going back to work at Area 51.
Wow.
So I have a whole family of like science people. My mother also works in the science, and the Department of Energy and all that. So he once told me, you're never going to be. Nobody ever really made money working for somebody else. It's like, go in business for yourself. So I did a lot of training through Digital Tutors, which is now Pluralsight. And also, and that fell apart too. They were being so strict about tutorials and so forth. Right, the point where I'm like, I'm going in business for myself. I'm not going to have a middleman telling me I got to do this and that, this check mark, and I need to do all this. I'm like, forget that. So I made my own website, which is VFXforFilmmakers.com. And so far, it's been great. It's great to have a secondary income, especially in this climate. And it's also not having to be dependent on some place, which is great. So I got to work on with Sam Jackson and Spike Lee on a couple of Capital One commercials at a studio in Chicago. Got to meet some incredible artists. I got to work on a couple feature films, doing visual effects supervision and so forth. And now there's this opportunity. I won't get into detail how it happened, but to come to Purdue University, which is a public school. It's my first encounter with a public school.
Okay.
But it's a science school. This school is known for engineering. It's known for a lot of really. It's got it's got top aviation schools. So there's a lot of hands-on stuff going on at this place, and I'm going for an MS degree right now, Master's in Science, so I'll be getting into a lot more programming. And the way that this school is set up is rather interesting because it's not like your atypical school that you would go in and try to learn to be a VFX supervisor or be a compositor or an environment artist, but it's more along the lines of kind of making you the science guru that works multi-disciplines across different platforms and different businesses. And that stuff can sound kind of, when you hear interdisciplinary, I can never say it right, between different departments, working with other departments, that stuff can get kind of wonky. But here, it's really, really high-tech stuff going on here. I mean, when I came in for the tour, they were in there, the students were working on haptic suits and so forth, and it was just like, wow, this is it. And with the coming of the Unreal 5 engine, it's a time to learn new technologies. Like I bumped into a VFX student here, really smart guy. He known me from my tutorials, and I was like, what's going on? He's like, I'm actually moving towards Unreal right now, and I'm adopting all these different techniques. And I'm like, this is cool. It's like we're moving into a different direction that is new territory completely with new technologies. And again, that might sound pie in the sky sometimes, but that's one thing I like about this school. And that's why I'm coming here to get my master's, because plus for myself to move on to teach at other institutions, they're all requiring a master's now. So.
Yeah, okay. It was quite interesting to hear your kind of
politics on the kind of education system, which is something I didn't think we'd actually end up talking about. But when you were saying a lot of that, I was like, I totally get that. But
14 years of teaching, you'll get it down pat, and I'm sure you know it as well.
Yeah, it was. The other thing was interesting actually, as I was talking to Manoj from Mad Lux VFX. We were talking about Unreal, and the past 6 months is kind of all I've seen. I thought photogrammetry was going to take a bigger kind of leap forward in terms of using that kind of technology. I haven't seen it used as widely as I thought I would have by now, but now Unreal Engine's come along, and that's had a lot more traction already as far as I'm concerned with everything I've been reading. So it's a weird one, to be honest, but no.
Well, to see what they're doing at ILM with that stagecraft, for the Mandalorian show.
Mandalorian, yeah.
That stuff is just crazy, when you think about it. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, compositing, programs like Nuke are rather simple. They're simple math, plus, minus, divide.
Yeah.
It's not. There's not a lot. I mean, I'm more of a compositor by trade, but I taught all disciplines, everything from animation, and so forth. So it's kind of weird for me jumping in to become a student. So yeah, it's going to be rather interesting. But it's good to kind of step back, kind of switch sides for a minute. I never intended to go here for the reason of the pandemic. I already planned to go here, and then all of a sudden this happened, and I was just sitting around going, am I even going to go to college?
Yeah.
And right now they've got many incredible issues to take people to social distance and all that. I'm like almost 99% sure I had the virus in March. A lot of people in Chicago, where I'm at, got it around March.
Okay.
It was like 3 weeks of fun. I have friends who've got it and so forth. But for me personally, it wasn't really that bad. You know what I mean? I saw it go through my family and so forth. So I'm like, and then we look back and we like, and I started talking with friends of mine who work at the local hospitals in Chicago. Like, yeah, this thing was here in January. Here we closing the doors in March. It was already here in January, and we knew it as a respiratory illness, and there was no change between January, February, March. It was just here, but we didn't call it COVID.
Yeah,
which was interesting because when I got this thing, I literally was shaking so bad in chills that I don't want to be graphic, but I was like, I had to dry heave from the muscle contractions in my stomach.
Wow.
And I'm like, what is this? And I never get the flu. Never get the flu. I take vitamins every day. Then I had like a week of the flu and then a week of a headache. When you have a headache, they usually tell you that's when you're over it,
Yeah.
And I'm going through this and thinking, this has got to be the flu because there's only 2 people who are on the cruise ship that are actually here in Chicago that have it. So how could I have caught them from them? They're self-isolating. You find out after everywhere I go from my landlady, she's like, oh yeah, I had it back in blah, 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 back in the same time, late February, early March. So it's really weird. So I don't know. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I'm like, I think, we're going to do our best to protect everybody, but I'm afraid that the fear of lawsuits might start to close schools around the U.S. I mean, that's what it is. Everything is being charged by the fear of lawsuits, I think.
Yeah.
So I don't know. We'll see what happens. But as of right now, next week I begin classes.
Well, I hope it does go ahead for you. I got a couple of questions from my students in particular, and it'll be interesting knowing your point of view as somebody who's been both an educator and a supervisor as well. So what would you say are the most important skills or qualifications when applying for a job in visual effects? So they can be like software skills or interpersonal skills, or what would you say?
Well, I didn't write that down. Let me see if I
can. Don't worry.
I like the lickety split is what I call it.
Mm-hmm.
Like you got to pick it up quick, and you got to be. Sometimes this is something that you just inherently have. That's why in our field there has to be selective enrollment. There has to be. Purdue, you have to have like a 3.5 GPA to get in here. Thankfully, I made it, and then I had to go through that GRE test, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is all the stuff I forgot in high school, and it's a lot tougher to get into this school. And I find that it's not to say that, the little engine that could can't, but the reality is some people can't do this. It's not for them. Some are great artists at other stuff, but there has to be that lickety split love for it, obviously, problem solving quickly. And as far as, when someone talks to you in a job, they're going to be, really to see if you can solve these problems. Really, problem solving. I mean, that's just basic 101.
Yeah, it's weird that you mentioned that lickety split, because I've seen so many artists and work with so many artists, and some, in my opinion, are like either fully technical artists or fully creative artists. And I've seen a few people, but only very few people, who are both really good at the technical side, at the tech side, and both really, really creative in their in anything they do. It's very rare I see somebody who's really good at both sides. Do you see that, or do you disagree? Or
yeah, I find that the highly technical guys are a little bit faster than the creative guys. They slow down a little bit. They're more nitpicky.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I spent more time as a character technical artist, and it was more about how do we get in-game facial wrinkles, how do we get 33 bone facial rigs to work correctly to match to actors like Vin Diesel, whose face is always like a stone cold face, and you try to make him smile, and he looks like the Joker.
Yeah.
This is an interesting time we're entering into. Besides, a lot of VFX people are kind of like, I think they're getting back to work now, if I'm not mistaken. It's just a weird environment to start looking for a job.
Yeah. So obviously you mentioned that you've been as an educator for 14 years. So we've kind of discussed how long it's taken to you to get to where you are now and that. But what would you say are the main challenges you've faced throughout your career?
I wouldn't say challenges. I mean, I had some great bosses that helped me out. I always go back to Tony Llewellyn, who's still one of the lead tech guys over at Another Realm right now. I mean, the guy we need tough bosses more than anything nowadays to kick us in the rear end. And there was a few people there like that, but Tony was the one that would like not threaten you, but like, get on this, and that really helped me, because it's like, okay, again, it's going to be just learning new stuff and so forth. My career has been, I don't know if I call it a career. It's been mostly a teaching career.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. One thing. I think that's quite interesting, because like you said earlier, when you're in education, you've got to kind of at the same time keep on top of the whole what's going on in industry and these new processes and new workflows. And I think as an educator myself, that's the bit I find possibly the most challenging, is trying to keep on top of all the teaching stuff which I got to do, but also keeping up to date with kind of industry and new softwares and new workflows and all that. But
well, you can know new softwares, but implementing those softwares in a production environment is really where, as a teacher, you can't go for more than 5 years before you really need to dive into different studios and so forth. The problem I had was I was in Chicago, and there was only really 2 or 3 major studios there in the realm of visual effects. I got the game stuff down. A lot of the game stuff hasn't really changed recently. You're still using some similar tools and so forth, and you learn something like, and there's some great resources for learning stuff now. But in general, it's production that you're needed. I've had students that, I'm not kidding, like hate my guts because when they went into the industry, like, this wasn't here, and they're highly successful. I'm talking like the top birds that I had as students, and they came back and like going at me like, I wanted this is blah blah blah, and I'm like, look, I'm a teacher. I'm good at teaching. You know what I mean? And I did take an effort to try to work at different production houses, and it just never panned out a lot of times. I mean, I get once in a while some gigs here and there, but I did my best to learn online. So yeah, it's a double-edged sword, because you're dealing with a realm with students that are upset about the price tag. ticked off. They want Dennis Murin in the classroom. Well, you're not going to get Dennis Murin in any classroom. Maybe Lost Boys. I think Lost Boys to me has been inspirational in regards to what they're doing, because they seem to have a lot of part-time teachers working in production and so forth, and a lot of people that I worked at NetherRealm, they didn't want to teach. They don't want to quote unquote babysit, you know what I mean? Because there is so many students today that are struggling emotionally with all types of problems, and a lot of them, I have to say, with these open private colleges are lazy, and nobody wants that headache. They work 8-9 hours a day at a game studio. That they really want to go into a class at night and deal with a bunch of people that don't want even to be there. You know what I mean? So it was always hard, because there wasn't a lot of studios in Chicago, and the people that were working in the studios, if they did work part-time, they did go, and most of them didn't even care. They more looked like I'm here, I'm getting a quick buck, and then I'm out of here. And it always kind of had that mentality. And there was a cold mentality too. I noticed a lot of the part-time teachers from studios working at these places always had a very cold attitude towards the students, because it was like, I'm here, they were more concerned about the money, and sometimes they wouldn't even show up for class half the time. So I was like, what is this? Why are we hiring this guy if he's just going to play games, So yeah. Yeah,
okay. That's all really good. So we kind of touched on a little bit of the maybe a challenge in times, but what would you say has been the most rewarding part of your job so far? It could be in education, it could be in studio, it could be in games.
I think the most rewarding thing that I've done is my website, because I can make a living off of a website and I don't punch out training like crazy. I have to have a passion for what I teach on my training videos, and I have a habit of packing so much into them that they're well worth the price tag. And again, you can go on different websites I sell through, you'll see the reviews will speak for themselves, but I try to get as much bang for their buck out there, especially when we got competition to these low price training sites like Udemy, where they do a sale every 10 minutes. And it's like $10 for some. I'm thinking instructors should be getting paid more for all that information he's giving out, and you guys keep throwing these sales on there. I have a couple training videos on Udemy, but I stopped after 2 videos until I found out what I was dealing with. I'm like, I do make some little money on side from them, but I'm like, I could be making more money off Udemy, but I don't like this practice where you're, I'm going to bring your, price tag down I'm going to have a sale every 5 minutes. It's the end of September sale. It's the beginning of October sale. It's like, and I do run sales too myself, on my website. Like right now I got one going for back to school, and it's like, I think the coupon code is back 50, and then you get 50% off. So if anybody wants to,
I'll put that. But, I mean, stuff. Yeah, I'll put all that down in the description as well. So if everyone checks the description down there, all that detail will be there for you.
Thanks. But I mean, it's cheap. My training's cheap. I'm not putting somebody $30,000 in debt. I want to also say that we as instructors working for institutions are not responsible for the debt that the students have accrued. I've had some real smart alecky students who have gotten so vindictive over years. And I'm just like, dude, I'm just trying to do my job. I did the best I could. And that's the element of mercy. There has to be mercy in the midst of this. In reality, that I've seen students, we had one program back at one school I taught, and it was like a graphics design program. And the kids were thrown into it, and we didn't have many instructions for it, but they all graduated positive. They didn't get as much education as they should have gotten, but every one of them is working for like a major a production house in Chicago, and they had just a great positive attitude despite what they were dealing with. And you always get shortchanged when you go to college. You always will, because of the infrastructure and the overhead, But yeah, I say that the proudest thing I ever did was my website, because it was a chance to, first off, like I'd say 80% of my stuff is for free. So I get tons of international people downloading my stuff, and I'm coming up to like 1 million views on YouTube right now. And I think I got like 13,000 subscribers. So it's really starting to take off, and I got to interview a lot of really great artists in the industry that has helped all of the compositing artists out there. So yeah, that's been the most beneficial. And that was the advice I took from my dad. He said, go in business for yourself. And that's what he was stating when he was saying, nobody ever made money working for somebody else. I said, yeah, you're right. I mean, cut out the middleman, open up your own business, you know what I mean? And it's great money. There's many websites you can go to. You don't have to have a PhD or whatever, and you can put training out there. So if you're good at what you do, be known as a helper, as a giver, and put up some training on a website, Udemy or whatever. People will recognize you, and you can have some extra secondary income. You know?
It's really interesting that you're talking about that, because I started off as well with some Udemy and a couple of Skillshare courses, and then I realised exactly what you were saying. It's like all that time I'm kind of putting into that, and I made $4 off that because it was reduced by 98%. But
there is a clause for those of you doing Udemy. You can go into your clause and change it where they force you to pay the full price, and they can't use those sales, but they will ghost you during the sales.
Right. Okay.
So I go with that. I don't bother with their 90 bajillion% off. I'm like, no. That's a little ridiculous. I understand that businesses got to make money, but I don't know.
It kind of ties into our next question, because again we've spoken a little bit about VFXforFilmmakers.com. We were going to talk about any other possible resources. Could be books, websites. What if you were to give like a reading list to aspiring VFX artists? What would you kind of point them towards?
Obviously, Effects PhD. They actually. They sponsored my show, Ask the VFX Pros. I recommend everybody, if you're getting into VFX, go through, I think I have 20 hours of interviews by some of the top VFX artists, mostly compositors, but also there's lighting guys and so forth in there. They'll give you a bird's eye view geographically, and it's a great series. I think, again, Effects PhD if you're more of a compositor, Gnomon if you're a modeler. And I'm trying to think of any other resources. As far as school is concerned, right now, the only school, even Gnomon is, I heard people kind of fishy about Gnomon now, although a Gnomon on ground, not online.
Yeah.
But Lost Boys, specifically for compositors and so forth, is good. I've talked to people who've gone to Vancouver Film School, and I think it's starting to become a diploma mill. I could be wrong. I've heard, I first heard very positive things, and then I heard if any film school is a diploma mill, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Any film school. I don't care if it's New York University or something. Just to give you an example, I knew this one woman named Leah, and she super artsy, and the only reason she got into New York University, NYU Film School, besides paying a ridiculous price, was that she wrapped herself in plastic wrap naked and made a film of it, and it was about how constricted women were or something, and I'm like, come on, I'm like wait, this is getting a little over the top, you know what I mean? It's just there's just so many weird little film school. To me is just it's wherever you go, it's a trap. VFX is a hard field. You need to be somewhere geographically for VFX. You need to be in Vancouver or London. I'm convinced of that more now than ever. You have to move there. I did this stupid thing. I stayed in Chicago. And in Chicago, there is nothing here. If there is, it's the mill and frame store, and I applied there a million times, and I never got in. Came close, but it was just the people that they hire in Chicago are usually from LA. They bring them in, and if there's a really great maverick, I've had some students work at these studios, then they'll pull them on, but they're not going to risk some novice kid coming in from high school and so forth. But yeah, that's the only kind of things I would look into. Again, it depends. Animation is something. Animation Mentor, obviously, for animation. That's the only thing I could say. A lot of online resources. We are entering into the Ready Player One world, where we're all going to be having drones deliver us pizzas. And
no, I completely agree with that. That there's so much online that people can see. And funnily enough, going back to your geographical point of view, I did the exact same thing. Instead of going 200 miles up the road to London, I stayed in Cardiff. Still worked on some pretty good stuff, but geography is a huge thing, and I think you've got to go into it feet first, ready to commit. So yeah, I've got two more questions from my students in particular. One of them being, what are the most important things to include in your show reel? Now, obviously, that could depend what job you're going for. So I'm going to assume they're going into industry, probably going to be looking at roto and prep jobs straight off. So considering that, what would you say are the most important things to include in a show reel?
Are your students mostly compositors?
Yeah, I've got a mixture of motion graphics students and visual effects students, because it's a combined course, visual effects and motion graphics. But this is for the visual effects students. So yeah.
I used to have a bias against After Effects stuff, but I noticed that when you put a little bit of like design in there, just a little bit, it does help, depending on what studio you're dealing with. If you're doing with compositing, obviously roto cleanup, stuff like that. Stuff that's very dull. I used to. He actually runs a studio out here in Chicago now, and Ryan Urban. He had been at I used to host the founder user group meetups in Chicago. Okay. And Ryan, I think he owns his own studio now in Chicago, but he had worked at the Mill and a couple other places. He had worked also under the Wachowskis at Kineworks on their films. They have a studio here in Chicago. So he was like the lead compositor guy for that, and a couple of my students worked under him. And I said to him, "What are you looking for? Because I'm a teacher, I need to know so I could." And he said, "All of your stuff is showy. I want to see the basic stuff. I want to see cleanup, difficult shots, maybe a tough key. I don't want to see spaceships fly across the screen."
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
And I think that's what a lot of kind of students think. Oh, how can I make it look like the most, like you say, showy and everything? But actually, maybe what the good thing to things focus on the basics. Show us your breakdown of how you made that roto and what you did for the cleanup there. So yeah, maybe keeping it simple but good is better.
Well, his response was, "I worked in 2D for 5 years. I didn't jump into 3D until year 6 in my production experience." So yeah, he totally kind of drove us into a better direction as far as like modifying our reels not to be so showy, because you're biting off more than you can chew, being a one-man band trying to throw together a scene from Transformers. It doesn't matter how talented you are biting off more than you can chew, and you're like, "I'm going to do this big explosion," blah, blah, blah,
Yeah. Well, that kind of also ties into you saying that your friend was, in 2D for 5 years. Kind of does tie into my next question a little bit, because I had another question from my students specifically about industry, asking, would it be better to work for a large visual effects company such as Framestore, The Mill, where you, in their opinion, now I'm just reading what they're saying, progress slower but work on bigger projects, or work for a smaller, lesser known company on smaller projects but possibly you get they're saying possibly experience more roles and responsibilities? Do you think that's a thing? And do you think I would not go by my advice, because I consider myself a teacher more. I've spent more years teaching than working in production, but I can go by the collective opinion of what the interviews I've done on Ask the VFX Pros, which you guys can check out. And that is, obviously starting at a small studio. I found in London, it seems like DNEG's the greatest place to start. I think that seems to be the studio where you get thrown into this craziness. MPC, hearing things about MPC. I don't know much about it. As people at MPC like angry at me. I'm sure there's great employees, but it seems like every time I kind of have all these interviews from these guys that start out, it just seems like DNEG is a great place to start. You jump in, you work crazy hours. But I find every person that goes, we interviewed Tony Lyons. He does not have my opinion, by the way. Thanks. And that is, he would talk about, you see the pattern of these guys starting out at maybe small studios, jumping is key. Yeah. And then, and being enticed to go work for Dark Vader, which is some big studio like ILM or something. And go work there to say I worked there and have that on my reel, and then jump back to a medium-sized studio. It seems like when they move into that senior position and they don't like the hecticness, they seem to jump back into a senior
position at more of a small, medium-sized production studio. It seems like sticking around at Island. I had friends that when I worked over at NetherRealm had worked Industrial Lights and Magic, and they did not see the light of day.
Yeah.
And the longevity of that can only last so long, you know.
I think that's something you've got to be careful of as well. And I think, like you said, jumping around from studio to studio is something you kind of got to do. And I think also
just jump.
That's also, I think, what people need to know going into the industry, a commitment that they're going to have to be able to commit to, because, yeah, it is, like I said, so important. All right, well, that is all the questions that we've got so far. So I think, you know, obviously you're going to be very busy with the move and starting to purge, so we will leave the questions there. So, like I said, again, thank you very much.
Thanks, John.
So, that was the first part of a 2-part interview with Matt Skonicki. Huge thanks to Matt. The second part will be coming next week, and it'll be focusing on technologies within VFX. So if you can't hold on till next week, make sure to check out Matt's social links, like his YouTube channel, his website. But I will see you in the next interview in part 2.